Hey guys, welcome to part 2 in our series on Firebase Authentication with the Composable Architecture. In this part, we're going to go over a SignUpView. And if you haven't checked out part 1 yet, I highly encourage you to do so and download the source code so you can follow along. We will be picking up where we left off in that video. But let's take a look at what we're going to build here. It's going to be a very simple sign-up view with just an email, a password, and a confirm your password. We'll do some things like simple validation and hide and show the password, things like that. In part 3, we'll go into sign in and sign up, but we're going to stick with just the sign up view here. Again, if you want to see all the features we'll cover in all of these series, please download the app Sprigling and you can see them from the App Store. And if you like what you see, please subscribe so you can get all the videos as they come out. But let's dive into the sign up view. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is add a new module for our sign up page, and we're just going to call this authentication, and we will put our sign up, our sign in, most anything to do with authentication views in this feature. So we'll just add that, and we'll come down here and add, we're going to want tests for this as well. So we can just copy one that has test target already added, and we keep this in alphabetical order. So I'll put this up top and just call it authentication. And we don't need these. We will need the composable architecture. We want this, and then tests, and then authentication. Then let's go ahead and add our folders. And we'll add a first empty file. Let's add a folder for our tests. And an empty file as well. Rename this authentication. Oh, actually rename this one sign up test. And this will be our sign up view. Great. Okay, so let's go ahead and create our view now. First, let's import SwiftUI and the composable architecture. And then we'll go ahead and add our empty reducer that we always add. And then let's add a view. And we'll go ahead and add a preview as well. Let's give that a quick build. And let's see if we can see it in the preview. Perfect. Now we could go ahead and add some state. Let's add a quick initializer first. And so we know we're going to need a confirmed password, a password, and an email address. So we can go ahead and add state there. I'm adding the show passwords Boolean as well because we want a way to kind of turn on and off showing the hidden passwords. So we're going to use bindings on this state in order to fill some text fields. So let's go ahead and make our action a bindable action. And then inside here, we're going to need a binding case. So we could just paste that in. And now we're actually going to need to make this a binding reducer. And that should be all we need for now to start adding some text fields. So let's go ahead and add a text field. Let me close this first, give us a little more space. All right, text field, we'll call it email, and we'll give it a text of, let's see, $store.email, and a prompt. We'll just say, enter your email address. And then let's go ahead and delete this text. So that looks okay. Let's actually give a little horizontal padding to our VStack. Move it into the middle. Okay, this looks all right, but I don't like the way it's just sitting here floating in the middle, even though it works and everything, but with the white background, it just kind of looks a little weird. So let's take a look at modifying our text field a little bit. So to do view modifications, I like to put them all in a common module that I can share across the entire project. So to do that, we will just add a new module called common, and we don't need a test target for this. And then let's add a folder for it. We'll call this common. And the first file we're going to add is something I like to call rounded corners. And let's just call this rounded corners. And it's basically a view modifier that allows you to set the radius, the corners, stroke color, and the line width for any view. And it'll clip the shape and give it a rounded corners with whatever stroke you kind of define at the width you define. I have a tutorial for this on my website. It's not a video tutorial, but it's very simple, and it walks through kind of how to build this and why I use it. And I encourage you to go check that out. I'll add a link in the comments, but it's very useful. And let's take a look at how to use it. So to use it, first thing we need to do is add a dependency in our authentication module. And let's call this just common. And then inside our SignUpView, we just need to import common. And then we should be able to go ahead and add a rounded corners. Let's give it a radius of 5 and a line width of 0.5. Let's see what that looks like. So it's tight, so let's put some padding on the text field. Let's give it 8, see what that looks like. That's pretty good. So with this line width modifier, we can make that thicker if we want. And we could change what corners by passing in a corners array or a color, a stroke color to change out the line width. But I think this looks good, so let's go with that. So for our password fields, we're going to use a combination of regular text field and a secure field. One when we're showing the password and one when we're hiding it. So to do that, let's start with just our password field. So we'll do an H stack, because we will have our text field and then we will have the button. And inside the H stack, first we're going to check to see if we are showing or hiding the password. So we'll do if store.show passwords. And if we are, we're going to just use a regular text field here. And we'll just call this password. We'll give it the text of our $store.password. And we will give it a prompt of text. Call this enter your password. So if we're not showing passwords, we want to show a secure field instead. So we'll do a secure field, and this is going to be pretty much exactly like our text fields. We could just do this, and the next thing we need is to add a button to kind of trigger the change. But to do that, we'll need an action. So let's do a case dot show passwords button tapped. And now we can go ahead and add that button down here. And this will just be a button. This will be store.send show passwords button tapped. And we'll give it a label. And we'll just use the system image for the eye open and closed. Let's see what that looks like. Okay, cool. And again, let's go ahead now and add a rounded corners for this to make it look like the other one. But instead of adding it on the actual text fields themselves, we'll go ahead and just put it on the H stack. And this is a good example of why we did a view modifier on all views, because now I can add it here. And we can also add the padding directly to this. We'll do 8 as well. And as you can see, it's looking pretty good. Let's go ahead and add some spacing, vertical spacing. And let's give it, let's say 40. See what that looks like. Yeah, it's starting to look pretty good. So when we tap this button, we're not doing anything with it yet. So let's go ahead and implement that. So to handle this action, we need to add a reduce function in our reducer. So let's do that now. We'll do reduce. We'll pass state and action in. And then we will switch on the action. Let's handle our binding first. Just return none. And then let's handle our show passwords button tapped case. And here what we want to do is every time we tap this button, which will be tapping this button right here, we want to toggle our show passwords state. So we can just do state.showpasswords.toggle and we'll return none. And that should be all we need to do to get that working. Let's let this build and test it. That seems to work. It does look like we have our I backwards. It looks like we want to, when the I is not having slash, it should indicate we are, showing our password. So let's go ahead and switch this around. Add slash fill there. And now I think this makes a little more sense. With the slash, we're not showing it. Now we are showing it. So for our confirm text field, that's going to be very similar to our show. So let's just copy our regular password, that is. Let's just copy that, paste it, and we'll make some changes here. We'll call this confirm password. And in our prompt, we can say confirm your password. And we'll leave this as the same action now. So if you can toggle it from here or either place, right? It kind of makes sense. We don't need to have an individual action for it, but you very well could just by having a new action that says show confirm password or passwords. But for now, we'll just leave it to toggle both. So the last thing we need for this view really is a sign up button. And so let's add a new action. We'll call this sign up button tapped. And we'll handle this here. For now, we're just going to return none. And then down here below our last confirm, we can just add a new button. And we'll say store.send and let's see, sign up button tapped. We'll give it a label. We'll just say sign up. So at this point, our view is fairly well designed, and we even have some functionality. So we're actually ready to write our first tests. So let's go down to our sign up tests. Let's import Composable Architecture, and let's import our authentication library. And let's name this sign up tests. And the first thing we're going to test, the only functionality we really have right now, is tapping that show passwords button. So let's call this show passwords button tapped. So the first thing we're going to need is a store. So let's go ahead and add a test store. And this is a sign up feature. Let's go ahead and do a test bill. We need to make this main actor, and that should work. Let's do that again. Okay, great. So we have our test store, and we can basically expect right off the bat that we initialized show passwords to false. So if we do that, we can actually run this and see if it works. Which it did, and we succeed. Great. But that's not really the functionality we care about. What we want to test is that we tap that button and then that toggles. So we could do an await store.send, and let's go ahead and pass in that button tap. And we want to verify that when we do that, the show passwords button actually gets set to true because we're toggling it there. And let's go ahead and run that. Great, and that is our first test. So the next thing I really want to talk about is validation. So if we go back to our sign up view, and we'll take a look at the preview here. We have these three text fields, and before we do anything with sign up, we want to make sure that we're entering valid information. And so for our email, we want to make sure it's a valid email address and that it's not empty. And with our passwords, we want to kind of set some rules around what we want for a password. And then for our confirm password, we want to make sure that it just matches our password that we entered. And so we could do this in several ways. I like to actually add a view modifier for validation itself. And so let's take a look at that. So in our common module, we can just add a new file. And we'll call this one validation. And in here, we're going to add a very simple view modifier to check whether or not a input is valid. And so this basically has a Boolean is valid. We have this should validate Boolean because we don't want to update the view with the validation until we actually try to do something with it, meaning like every character you enter in a text field, we don't want to be showing if it's valid or not. We only want to show when we tap the button and check to see if it's valid. And then we have this message that'll display when the is valid is false. And so what we're basically doing is we're just creating a VStack here with our original content. And then if it's if we should validate, and if it's not valid, we're going to add this text right underneath it. And this is just some light edit styling here. I'm going to make it look red. I'm going to center it and make it a little bit smaller. So let's take a look at what it looks like. So now back in SignUpView, we should be able to just add a validate view modifier. And so you can see it's asking for is valid, should validate, and invalid message that we defined over in our validation modifier. So we'll need to set up that state here. But for now, let's just say true, and let's say should validate false, and we'll say email is invalid, something like that. So the first state we need to add is this invalid state. And that's basically just going to check if the email is valid or not. And to do that, we're going to want to run some regex on this email string. And so I like to do that in common as well. And I'll show you this in a second. So let's add a new file in common, and we'll call this string plus validation. We'll add all of our validation functions here against the string. And so first thing we'll do is an extension on string. And inside here, we're going to add a function is valid email, and I'm just going to paste this in. And this basically is some regex that you can find on the internet or ask ChatGPT or something to create it for you, because regex is pretty confusing. But this basically just matches what a domain.com email address, a regular email address, and it will return whether or not it's valid or not. So back in SignUpView, we can go ahead now and add a validation. So let's do var email validation. It would be a bool, and we'll just return email dot is valid email. And then we can add this email validation down here to the is valid parameter. Let's do store dot email validation. Let's go ahead and add our should validate state as well. And we will default that to false. And we'll pass that in here. And now when we tap on our submit button or sign up button, we want to set our should validate to true. So sign up button tapped, we can do state dot should validate equals true. And we should be able to see this now when we hit sign up, and it shows this. It is a little jumpy, so let's go ahead and add some animation to this. We'll just do linear. And now it should be nice and smooth. And when we actually put in a valid email address, it should go away, but that was really jumpy too. So let's go ahead and add some animation to our binding. And we can do that up here. We'll add animation. We'll do dot linear here. Now, if we go ahead invalid, let's do a valid one. It goes away nice and smoothly. So now we can go ahead and add a password validation, same way we added our email validation. So over here in our string extension, we can just add another function for is password valid, or is valid password. And this is doing basically the same thing, but we're checking to see if the string is 6 characters long and has at least one number in it. And this can be whatever you want, but for now this should work. Let's go ahead and build common to get those changes in. Great. Back in SignUpView, we can go ahead and add a password validation now. And we'll return password dot is valid password. And we can go ahead and add a validation down here to our password. We'll pass it the password validation. We'll still want to use should validate here, and we should do password is invalid. You can probably be better to say password needs to be 6 characters or something here, but password is invalid is fine for now. And let's go ahead and build that and check it out in the preview. So now we have password is invalid. If we give it a valid password, it jumps away. Oh, we need to do this animation as well. And we'll need to do that on both of them. Excellent. And now we can go ahead and add our confirm password validation. And this is going to just be making sure that our password and our confirm password match. So we'll do confirm password validation, and we'll return confirm password equals password. And we will do another validate down here. And we'll pass in confirm password validation. And we can do something like passwords need to match. And again, we can show, let's do a build and refresh our simulator or our preview. And this is showing up fine because they actually do match, they're empty. But if we added one value here, it shows that they need to match. But if I add the similar one there, that one goes away. And we can do a valid one here and a valid email address. It's showing they're not matching, which is accurate. We turn it on, we see we did what? SDF GDF5, and it's case sensitive. So we need a lowercase s. Maybe it's easy. There we go. And it goes away. Great. So let's go ahead and add a new test. So the first test we're going to do is our email validation. So let's add a new test. We'll call it email validation. And we need our test store. So let's go ahead and grab that. And then our first expectation is just going to be that our email validation is false because that's what we initialize it to. So let's go ahead and run that and see if it works. Great. And now we can actually send some valid text to our email state and verify that it changes that. So let's do store.send, and this is going to be in our binding and in our password, our email, mind you, and let's send it something like test@test.com. This should be a valid email address, and we'll just do $0.0.email, make sure it equals what we just passed in. And now we should be able to expect that this is true. Excellent. So let's do the same thing for our password validation. Let's add a new test. Password validation. I'm typing this out instead of using predictive text on here because sometimes you use it, this little diamond doesn't show up, and it's not showing up here either, which is interesting. This macro is not, the compiler sometimes takes a second to show this. That we added a new test to this function. Let's see what's going on here. There we go. And now let's add our test store. And our expectation, our initial one again, is going to be that the password validation is false. We can run that. Perfect. And now what we want to do is pass in a valid password to our binding. And this is going to be test123 or something like that. We'll do $0 dot password. This is test123, and then we'll just verify that this switches to true. Let's run it again. Excellent. So our last test is going to be for confirm password, and it's going to be a little bit different because initially the value is actually set to true because the password and confirm password text fields are empty to begin with. So our first expectation is actually going to be that confirm password validation equals true. And let's go ahead. Our triangle's not showing up. Let's see if we can get this. Authentication test. Sign up test. There we go. And so if we actually go ahead and pass in a password, we should be able to verify that this is now false. Because now password is set, but confirm password's not. So let's go ahead and run that. And now if we actually update the confirm password text field, to be equal to what password is, we should be able to verify that this switches back to true. Which it does. And that's all the tests we have right now for our signup view. So now we're ready to start adding the actual signup implementation. So the first things we need to do is up in package, let's add a dependency to authentication client here in our authentication module. SignUpView, let's go ahead and import Authentication Client. And let's give that a build. Great. Now we can actually add a dependency to our authentication client. So we can do a dependency var, do a key value, authentication client, and then we'll do var authentication client. Now we'll need a little bit of state to let us know when we're actually in the process of signing up. So let's do var sign up request in flight, and this will just be a Boolean, so we'll set it to false initially. And then we're going to need to handle the result back from this, which will be like a sign up response action. So we can add a new action here called sign up response. And again, this authentication client returns on sign up a void response. So we will just handle this void response here in the result. And then this is going to yell at us, and we'll actually handle this here in a second. But for now, we'll just do case.signup_response. We'll return none. And now we can, in our sign up button tapped action, we can handle the actual signing up process. And to do that first, actually, let's put this down at the bottom because we're going to handle the success and failure cases. And so the first thing we'll do here is check after we switch validation on, which we definitely want to do. We're going to check and make sure that the validations are valid. And so we can do if state.email validation and state.password validation and state.confirm password validation. If all of those things are valid, we're going to go ahead and set our request in flight to true. And so we'll do sign up request in flight equals true. Great. Okay, so now we actually have to return an effect to this action, and so we'll return a .run, and we need to capture the email password here. So we could do email equals state.email and password equals state.password, and we'll pass send in as well. And now we will do await send sign up response, and we'll handle the result in here. And we'll do try await authentication client.sign up with our email and password. And we'll also add a cancelable to this, which will be and we'll need an ID here, and we'll add this. We need to add a private enum for this. So we'll do private enum cancel ID, and we'll give it one case. And this will be a sign up request. So now we can do sign up request, and we'll allow in flight as well. Cancellation. Great. And again, if those validations aren't, we will just return none because our validation logic will actually be showing the user why they can't actually sign up yet. We don't need this return anymore because we're handling it inside of everything. Great. Now all we need to do is actually handle the response. Let's take a look at that. So right now we're handling the response. We're not really doing anything. And the default thing we want to do for both the success and failure case is just state set up or sign up request in flight. We just want to set this back to false. No matter what, on a response, we're going to set that to false. But we do want to handle the actual failure case a little bit differently. And so the way we do that, we can do case let sign up response and dot failure, and we'll have our error in here. For now, let's default return none. And so now we're actually handling the error case from that result separately from the success case. The success is just going to be handled with our default. But let's take a look at the actual implementation for failure. So if our request fails, we want to tell the user that it failed somehow. And to do that, we need to add an alert to our view that we can show when that happens. And so let's add an alert state up here. And we'll have an alert action, but we'll need to add that as well. And we'll just call that, paste that in as alert action. We actually need to handle a specific action for this alert as well. So we'll put that right here. And now inside of our reducer, down here, we have to handle case dot alert. We'll just return none. And we also have to do an if let on this. And finally, we actually, in our view, need to handle showing of this alert, which we can do down here under our padding. Great. Now back up in our failure case, we want to present that alert or set the alert state when this error message come in. But we actually have, an authentication error that has some specific messages for, Firebase errors. So we want to handle those a little differently. So we'll start off with a generic message, that we can display. This will just say there's an unexpected error, please try again. And we have to make sure that we set our in-flight status to false. This should be the first thing we do. So here's our generic message. And then we want to check to see if the error itself is one of our, custom authentication errors. So we can do if let error equals error as authentication error. We're going to change this default message to the one we get back from our authentication error. And then we are going to set our alert state to this message, which will be, we'll just pass in this message. And that should handle showing that error. So we can show that error in a new preview if we want by overriding the dependency and throwing an error. So let's look at that. So let's do preview, and we'll call this one error. And the first thing we'll need is our SignUpView and store. But here we're going to do with dependencies, and we're going to actually do an operation, and in the operation is where we're actually going to just return the store, which is this. But in our with dependencies, we're going to override this. We'll go $0 authentication client. oops, misspelled with dependencies. Let's fix that. And this will be client, and our sign up method, we're going to set to equal, and I believe we have to do sendable in. And now we can just do a throw. Let's do authentication error dot invalid email. And so let's see what the problem is here. Let's give a build and see if it goes away. No. Extra arguments in sign out. Let's take a look at that. Sign out. We want to sign up. Let's give that a build. So now we have our normal preview, and now we have this error preview. So let's switch over to that. And we'll put in a valid path email. Get this. This needs to be, let's just do test 1, 2, 3, test 1, 2, 3. And now when we hit sign up, our alert shows with this email is already in use or invalid error message. We can also show that this works in tests. So let's jump over to our sign up tests and add a couple more. So we'll start by adding our valid state. And first let's import our authentication client. And then we'll add a new function, sign up button tapped success. And we'll need our store, our test store, but we're going to actually override with dependencies. And inside of here, we'll actually do what we did in our preview. So we'll do $sign authentication client sign up, and we'll do equals, and we need sendable in, and here we'll return void response. So the first thing we can do is expect that, should validate is false on our initialization. And now we want to actually pass in valid view state, and do that just by passing in things that will pass our validation, because we're not really caring about that right now. And now we want to actually call our button tap. And so we'll do await store.send sign up button tapped. And inside of here, there's two mutations. We need $0 dot should validate equals true. And we need $0 dot sign up requested flight is equal to true. Those are the two things that happen. And let's go ahead and run this, because we'll get an error here because we're not going to handle the reception, but I want to show you guys this. So if we go ahead and run this, we're going to get an error because we got the store received one unexpected action. And that's basically because we are not handling the sign up response value. So let's go ahead and do that. Store.receive this time. And this will be sign up response. And we'll just do the success, even though we're doing this in the default, it should still work. And we should have one mutation here where if the sign up request in flight is now going to be set to false. Now, if we run this, it passes. Great. Now let's take a look at the error test. So let's do another test. We'll do a test function sign up button tap failure. We're going to need our test store again, so grab that. And instead of returning void response here, we're actually just going to do our throw. So let's do throw authentication error dot, we could do invalid email. And inside here, we're going to go ahead and again set up our view. And we'll call our button tapped as well. This should all be the same. We could add this expectation in here, but we don't really need to do it. We're already handling it in that case. And now on our reception though, we're going to handle the failure case. And in this failure, again, our signup will go to false here, but we're also going to set our alert state now to this invalid email description. And we can go ahead and run this. And now we're basically testing that we're showing this alert with this description. This is great. So that's it for our very simple signup view. Now let's take a look at what it takes to add it to root and add some observation of the signup. So first thing we need to do is add a couple dependencies to our root for authentication and authentication client. And then back in root, we can import those. Authentication client. And then let's add a new case for our signup feature. Sign up. Sign up feature. And now we'll need to update our case down here. Call sign up store, and then SignUpView or sign up store. Great. So now when we launch the app, we don't want to land on tabs anymore. We actually want to do a couple things. First, we want to check authentication to see if we are signed in or not. And if we are, we want to land on tabs. But if we're not, we want to go to the sign up page. And so we can do that by observing our authentication state change, which will send us the current authentication state as soon as we observe it. So let's take a look at doing that. Okay, so first thing, let's add a dependency. So dependency, authentication client, var authentication client. Our root feature needs to be sendable. And now we can go ahead and add an action to handle our result from observing. So let's put that here. And this will just be authentication state changed. We will need a cancel ID. Let's add that. Okay, now in our did finish launching method, we can go ahead and return an effect by calling that observe method. But first, let's handle the default case to get rid of this error. Authentication did change. We'll just return none. Okay, so here, let's go ahead and comment this out. We can return run, pass send in. In here, we'll do for try await value in wait authentication client dot observe authentication state changed. And then in here, we will call await send. This will be our success case here. So we'll do dot success and value. And for our error case, we'll do a catch here. And we need to pass in the error and send. Here we will do await send authentication.failure, and we'll give it the error. And then let's go ahead and do cancelable. We'll do cancel ID dot that, and we will allow this to be canceled in flight. Whoops, value. All right, now let's take care of the response. Let's get rid of this commented code. First one we'll do is failure. That's an easy one. This will be case let. And for now, we're just going to print out the error. Return none. And so success case though, for now we're going to do case auth state, and let's switch on this auth state. And for if we are signed in, we should have a user. So let's do actually this case let, and we'll have our user. For now, we're just going to return none. Deal with this in a second. And case dot signed out. This is where we will go ahead and set us to tabs. I mean to our signed in. Sign up. Here we actually want to do state.mode, those dot tabs. And we need to just return done. We're not doing anything with this user. We'll do that in a second. But for now, just to recap, when we get an auth state back, we are either going to be in a signed in or signed out state. If we're signed out, we're going to land on the sign up page. If we are in a signed in state, we're going to land on the tabs. And so what we want to do next is store this user in a way that we can access throughout the app. And so let's take a look at doing that. So if you remember back in part 1 of this series, when we created our user domain object, we added this shared state extension here to allow us to store the user in a shared state and share it throughout the application in memory. If you're not familiar with shared state in TCA, I'll provide a link to the documentation, but I would suggest you go watch their videos where they go in detail on how this works and why it's important. But now we actually get to use it. So back in root, we can add a @shared, and this will be our active user here. So we'll say .active user, and we'll just be var active user. And we gave it a type of optional user, so it's going to initialize it to nil. But when we land here with this user now, we can actually set this state.activeUser equals user. And now we are storing this user for use in every aspect of the application, which will come in very handy in the future. So now we're just about ready to write some tests, but let's take a look at our preview first, and we'll see some issues that we want to fix before we start writing tests, because we'll use the solution there in the tests themselves. So let's let this build. Okay, so you'll notice first that we set this up to you should land on sign up because we don't have any authentication, but you'll look here in our authentication client. In our previews, we're just defaulting to return a user. So this is working as we initially intended. We can fix this by overriding this preview and passing in a new dependency where we can change if we want this to show at signup or at the tabs. And so let's do that now. So the first thing we want to do is allow us to override the authentication client in our previews. So we can do this with dependencies. We'll do an operation, and that should close that off. And in here, we'll do our app delegate, delegate.store, and we'll do our app delegate. Oh, we want to do on appear here. here, perform, and we'll do delegate dot store dot send. So we did finish launching. Okay. And up here, we're going to override our dependency now, which is authentication client. And we want to override this equals. And in here, instead of helping us land on tabs, we want to send a signed out. So go back to our client here. We can grab this code. And instead of sending a user back, we'll just yield a signed out state. Now, this looks all good, but you'll notice that, if we actually put in a proper email address and this, we hit signed up, it doesn't do anything. And you might think, oh, well, all we got to do is, override that signed up button. So we can try that. Sign up. And we just want to set this to I'll need to do a sendable. And here's where you'll start to see the breakdown. It's like, okay, what do we do here? We could, just return void response, right? Like we did in our other view. And again, if we do this, we don't get anything because we're just returning void response. We're not able to send whatever user that we're creating in this signup over to this authentication state change to make it come down into here, because we're just sending dummy values here. Like even if we created a user and returned it somehow, we don't want to return it. We want to send it to this authentication state observer. And this is what Firebase does behind the scenes for us as an API. But in our tests and in our previews, we don't really have a way to do that. So we can do that by implementing our own helper actor that can basically, we could send a value to, and it will pass that value over to an authentication observer. So basically a mock API in order for us to do previews and to handle tests. So let's take a look at implementing that. So let's create a new file. We're going to do this up in our authentication client module, and so we can access it from tests and from previews anywhere we import this authentication client. So we'll create a new file from template. This will be a Swift file. Great. So I'm just going to paste this in and we'll talk about it. So there's this. Let's switch this over to authentication client and give it a build. So we're using an actor instead of a class to help with some threading. And since we're going to need to use this inside of our authentication client for testing, as well as in our previews, when we override our dependencies, this will just help out tremendously. We have two properties, our continuation and a current state, that'll allow us to store what the current state is and update it as new states get set. The first public function we have, this observe authentication state change, this is what will be called to create that observation. It's basically mimicking what Firebase does on the back end. And so we can, we store the current state that we pass in. This helps us with testing and things like that as well. But then we want to call this add continuation, the first thing we do when we get into our throwing stream, which stores this continuation for us. And also basically, this is what does that initial yield of the initial state, kind of mimicking again what Firebase does. Then we just have some cleanup on termination with remove continuation. And then the other public function here is this update authentication state. And this is what we can call to set a new authentication state to kind of mimic what happens when you do sign up with Firebase. And so that's pretty much it. It's just a mock of what Firebase does behind the scenes, but this will help us tremendously in our previews and testing. So let's take a look at what that looks like. So let's switch back over to root, do a quick build. Let's switch over to our root view. And the first thing we're going to want to do inside of our with dependencies function is grab, create an instance of this authentication state observer. So authentication. Great. And now inside of here, instead of just, returning this async throwing stream, we should be able to just return this authentication state observer dot observe authentication state change, and we can give it a initial state of signed out. And again, what we're doing here is we're calling this function which returns this async throwing stream and giving it an initial state of signed out. And now if we go ahead and build this, we need an await here. Let's build that. So we're in a signed out state. That's great. But we're still in that same situation where if we do test.com, test 1, 2, 3, test 1, 2, 3, signup's not doing anything, right? Because we're overriding it here and we're just returning void response. So in order to make this actually work, we can do await authentication state observer dot update authentication state change, and we can do signed in, and now we can actually pass in a user. And we'll just say negative. We'll say test.com. Actually, we can go ahead and handle this email. And we'll pass the email here. And then after that, we'll call our void return void response. We don't have access to domains. Let's import that. Let's see, give this a build and run our preview. Now, if we do test at test.com, do test 1, 2, 3, test 1, 2, 3. I think I did that right. If we hit sign up, we actually sign in. So again, the beauty here is that we're storing this authentication state observer inside the override of this dependency, so we can actually access it from both of our overrides here. And so we're really just mimicking again what Firebase is doing behind the scenes by setting that state and observing it, and since it's an actor, which is a reference, it handles that and allows us to basically run through the whole flow. We can actually use this in tests as well, and it becomes critically important to get our exhaustive testing that we want to run through the entire flow from root. And so let's take a look at doing that. So let's head over to our root tests, and our did finish launching. We have one test that's basically our only state, but now we have two states that we want to kind of test with did finish launching. So we'll call this one did finish launching signed out, and we'll need to do some imports here. So let's grab authentication client, domain, and authentication, and we're going to first things first. Let's get an instance of that authentication state observer that we can use, similar to previews. And again, similar to previews, let's override our observe authentication state change with this signed out initial state in the observer. So this expectation is valid still, but this is going to change a little bit. So first thing we want to do, we're not going to make any mutations to our state inside of this did finish launching call. So we can get rid of that. But this is going to be a long running effect, this observe authentication states change. So we actually need to store a value from the return of this, and we can just do let did finish launching effect equal. And then at the end of our function, we're actually going to cancel this, and we can do that right now. We'll just call did finish launching. Let's just make sure I got this name, which I don't. Did finish launching effect dot cancel. And to verify that, we don't have anything still going on, since we are handling with long running effects in this test, we'll just do await store.finish. But in between, we can actually run this and we'll see the errors we get and we'll fill them in. Okay, so we got one unexpected authentication change we need to handle. And so we can do that by, after we call did finish launching, we need to handle the success case. So we'll do await store.receive authentication state changed .success. And inside of here, the mutations we're dealing with is just, we're setting the mode. It's going to equal sign up state. There we go. I believe that's all we need. Let's go ahead and run it and see. Excellent. And now we need to do the signed in test. So we can actually copy this because it's very similar. And we'll call this signed in. And instead of this initial state of signed out, we will send it a signed in, and we'll give it a user. Do -999 and test.com. Now, again, we're going to store this effect, cancel it here at the bottom, but inside of the success now, we're not going to land on sign up. We should land on tabs. And this should be tabs feature.state. And there's one other thing that happens, mutation here, is we get that user back inside of root. Let's take a look here. And we're setting the active user. So we actually need to test that as well. So we can go ahead and do $0.activeUser is going to equal same user we're creating up here. And that should be all we need. Let's go ahead and run it. Great. Now we're testing both the signed in and signed out state for did finish launching. So we now actually have all the functionality we need to sign up to Firebase. Up until this point, we've just been doing it in tests and with previews, not actually hitting Firebase. But now we're ready to try that. So if you haven't followed part 1 of this series, you'll need to, in order to set up Firebase, get your Google plist to enable authentication and to go with this next step. But once you have done that, pause this video, then come back to this step. But you should be able to just go to your Firebase project and here on this authentication. So you'll probably land on this project overview and then come down to authentication. And this will show you all of your users that have authenticated with your app. And so right now we don't have any. So if we run this app in the simulator, you can see we landed on sign up, is what we expect. We have no users, so that authentication method just put us at the sign up page. But if we go ahead now and let's do test at test1.com, something like that. And we'll do test. We can update that to let's do test 1, 2, 3. Test 1, 2, 3. And now if we hit sign up, we should actually sign up with Firebase and land at the tabs view. Let's take a look. when we landed at the tabs view, let's see what happened in Firebase. We'll refresh this page. And we actually have our user. This is perfect. This is what we want. So we went over a lot. To wrap things up, let's recap a little bit. We have added a sign up page that allows us to enter an email, password, and confirm it. We added validation to that. We added some error handling, showing the user the alert. And then in our root view, we actually added the ability to observe the authentication state changes, and then switch on that state change to depend where we want to open the application to, either on tabs or sign up. We added this authentication state observer to help with testing as well as previews, so we can watch the whole flow without actually hitting the live Firebase server, which is very handy. And we have full test coverage on everything we've added. So this is a lot, but it's great. In part 3, we're going to dive into sign in and sign out, so we can actually have the full authentication flow. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel so you can see those videos as they come out. And I hope you like the channel. Please leave any comments you have on anything you want to see or anything I could do better. Open to all sorts of feedback. So thanks again for watching, guys.